Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and healing from narcissistic relationships. And I'm going to throw a cultural reference in here that some of you are too young to remember. Well, let's start with what it is, which is what happens on Monday. How many of you know what that means? I can see some of you are my age sitting up straighter. So I went to college in the 1980s, or high school in the 1980s and college. And I was sitting with some of my college friends recently. And one of them was actually, she was talking to me, giving me some professional advice. And she says to me, remember the Breakfast Club, Ramani? What happens on Monday? And I was like, oh, that's right. What happens on Monday? Now, for those of you who didn't see the film, you really should, because it was actually one of the best of that time. There's a statute of limitations on spoilers, so I'm going to tell you what happened. So throughout this, there's an all-day Saturday detention in a high school, and people come together, and very unlikely couples come out of it. And at one point, at the end of the day, one of them looks at the other and says, what happens on Monday? And it's a reference to the fact that the sort of surreal cocoon of that all-day Saturday detention is going to look very different on Monday when everybody's back at school, because there are only like six kids in this detention. But that's not what my friend was talking about when she said it. She was using the film as a reference, and I sat with what my friend said, and she was referring to shorter-term healing fixes. Like she was talking to someone like, for example, going to a one-day meditation class or a weekend yoga retreat. But when that one day or that 2 days is done, they have to return to their regular lives, begging the question of what happens on Monday. And it dawned on me when she said that this is a huge question for survivors of narcissistic abuse who are attempting to heal. And it's something I actually grapple with quite a bit as I draw together all of this information on healing. Now, I know that survivors, not just of narcissistic abuse, but of anyone who is dealing with something, will reach out and immerse perhaps in something that lasts a day or a weekend or even a week to learn and heal or talk. People do this. They're trying to bring things together to help them heal. But again, it begs the question, what happens on Monday? Because it's tricky. One thing I universally observe in survivors of narcissistic abuse is that when they do get some time away from the chronic invalidation of the relationship, the criticism, the shaming, the rage, the manipulation, and the gaslighting, and they spend time talking with other people for a day or 2 days who are actually validating and like-minded, and there are safe conversations and periods of time focused on mindfulness and general health, that spending a few days getting to simply be yourself and not be judged for it, that is really, really healing. And I have watched people flourish under these conditions. But I'm going to ask it again. What happens on Monday? What happens when you leave this weekend or this day or even this week and you're back in the space with the narcissistic person, back home, back working with them, whatever, even after devoting all these hours to learning about relationships, learning about yourself, breathing, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, talking to other people, support groups, after taking time to feel stronger in the face of it, it's tricky. In order to heal from narcissistic abuse, you got to remember it's a multi-step process. In order to heal, first you need to know what narcissistic abuse is and how it shows up. You need to know the traits and the behaviors that comprise narcissistic abuse. Second, you have to see how those patterns affect you and are resulting in all kinds of things happening within you that are confusing you. Then you have to be willing to see the narcissism clearly, and that starts that whole slow burn to radical acceptance. And then there's a tidal wave of grief, and as that grief settles into something manageable and you feel like you can actually see the light again, you phase into disengagement and building up supports and slowly giving yourself permission to be you in safer places. And let me tell you this, much as I wish it could, all of that can't happen in one weekend or 1 week. You can certainly make some meaningful shifts into getting ahead in your healing and thinking differently, but it's never going to be a quick turnaround. And we're left with that damn question of what happens on Monday? Because after spending some time away from the narcissistic people in your life and working on improving yourself and being validated by healthy people, and then getting tossed back into their orbit again, when you go home or when you go back to work, it can really feel like you've just fallen down a ladder or just had a bucket of ice cold water thrown in your face. It can feel like all those gains you made over the course of that week, they rapidly dissipate, and that all the things that you learn aren't enough to stop that feeling of despair and hurt and grief and depletion that all arise when you are in the presence of the narcissistic individual, and to go from feeling whole and supported and even hopeful to back to despair and grief can make healing feel impossible. What happens on Monday is that all of us are reminded of the painful truth that we actually would do better in our lives in most cases if the narcissistic person or people were not in it. But it may not be possible to get out of the situations that we are in, so our attempt to heal can become an almost painful reminder of the stark difference of a few days away with supportive people and coming back into an invalidating space. And you can see why so many people get lost in betrayal blindness or remain in denial and just don't want to address it. If you feel you can't make big ticket changes like getting out of the relationship, that contrast between a space of supportive people and simply being with a narcissistic person, it's just simply too destabilizing. So it's just easier to not recognize it. I have always cautioned people that healing from narcissistic abuse takes time. It takes time to connect the dots on all of this, to absorb it, and then to slowly heal. That's not to say that taking steps such as weekends away, retreats, or other offerings that allow you to learn useful coping skills, meet other survivors, and feel seen and heard is a bad thing. No matter what, at a minimum, experiences like that give you more tools for a toolbox. And if you're learning specifically about narcissistic abuse, may even give you more tools that will allow you to bolster radical acceptance and navigate the grief, as well as strategies to disconnect, disengage, and make clearer and have clearer voices and not lose faith as you individuate. Because Monday does always come. And after a few gaslighting moments, after you leave whatever healing space you were in or supportive people you were with, the resolve you had when you come off a healing experience can just dissipate. The key is to recognize that healing is small steps up a steep mountain, and that there is no magic to healing. It's hard, brutal, painful work, heartbreaking realizations, brave leaps into the unknown, and an excavation of the self. I know that forget even going to a healing weekend or a retreat. Sometimes you might even just take 3 days and go on a friend's weekend and be with old friends where it's familiar and you feel seen and heard. And you feel like a human being again, even after 2 or 3 days, and then you have to go back into the narcissistic relationship. It's for this reason that, yes, those weekends can help, but they're often not enough because you're always left grappling with what happens on Monday. And if it's spending time with a narcissistic person again, it can feel like a big setback. Well, you're probably going back to where you started when you left on your sort of retreat experience. But when you sort of think of it, no matter what kind of healing, this thing, thating you do, program, retreat, all of that, when you think of it as what happens on Monday, it really makes you think about, okay, I did this thing, but can I take what I learned in this sort of special healing space and generalize it and apply it to my life once I get back into the narcissistic relationship? It's something to think about. And for those of you who watch The Breakfast Club, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Thanks again.